The emergency beacon was still screaming when the first vultures arrived. Captain Rodriguez stood in the wreckage of what had been the research vessel Astral Dawn, trying to make sense of the carnage. Pirates had hit the ship hard, left nothing but twisted metal and corpses floating in the void. Standard smash and grab operation. Except for the crying. "Captain," her engineer called from behind an overturned bulkhead. "You need to see this." Rodriguez picked her way through the debris, stepping over what remained of the ship's research team. Poor bastards never had a chance. But the crying was getting louder, more desperate. She found them huddled in what had been the Xenobiology Lab's emergency shelter. 4 alien cubs, no bigger than house cats, with scales that shimmered like oil and eyes that reflected too much intelligence for something that small. "Well, shit," Rodriguez muttered. "That's not in the salvage manual." The cubs looked up at her with what could only be described as hope. One of them, braver or more desperate than the others, crawled toward her boot and made a sound that tugged at something she thought she'd left behind on Earth. "Ma'am," her communications officer's voice crackled through her earpiece. "We've got incoming ships, 3 vessels, Korthak configuration." Rodriguez's blood went cold. The Korthak Salvage Guild had a reputation that made pirates look charitable. "How long do we have?" "Maybe 10 minutes. She looked down at the 4 tiny creatures. Their parents were probably scattered across half this sector by now. No one was coming for them. "Pack it up," she called to her team. "We're taking passengers." "Captain, our salvage claim, we'll have to wait." Rodriguez scooped up the cubs, surprised by how warm they were, how they immediately pressed against her chest seeking comfort. "These aren't cargo." That's when the first Korthak ship docked. Korthak the Acquisitor was exactly as charming as his reputation suggested. 7 feet of scarred chitin, mandibles that clicked when he talked, and eyes like black marbles that missed nothing of value. "Captain Rodriguez," he said, consulting a datapad with movements that were too precise to be natural. "Salvage Guild registry shows this vessel as unclaimed. We are here to exercise legitimate salvage rights." "Knock yourself out," Rodriguez said, not moving from where she stood between the Korthak and her ship. "Most of the good stuff's already been picked clean anyway. Our scanners indicate biological specimens of significant value remain aboard." Rodriguez felt the cubs shift against her jacket. One of them made a soft, chirping sound. "Biological specimens," she said carefully. "Zephyrian combat breeds, juvenile stage. Current market value approximately 50,000 credits per unit." The cubs weren't just alien pets. They were someone's children. Someone's very valuable, very deadly children. "Combat breeds," Rodriguez repeated. "Indeed. Highly prized for private collections and arena combat. We have proper documentation for salvage claims on biological assets found in derelict vessels." Korthak held up a legal pad displaying what looked like 1,000 pages of very official, very boring bureaucratic nonsense. "Of course you do," Rodriguez said. "Here's the thing, though. These aren't assets. Scans clearly indicate they're kids." Korthak's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "The distinction is legally irrelevant. Abandoned biological material belongs to whichever party files appropriate salvage documentation first." Rodriguez looked at the legal pad, then at the cubs pressed against her chest, then back at Korthak. "You know what?" she said. "I think I'll pass on the legal education today. Captain, you do not understand. Galactic salvage law is quite explicit." "I understand perfectly." Rodriguez shifted her stance slightly, her hand drifting toward her sidearm. "You want to take 4 orphaned babies and sell them to whatever sick bastard has 50,000 credits to throw around. We want to exercise legitimate salvage rights under Galactic Trade Commission regulations. And I want you to get off my salvage site before I decide you're interfering with my operation." The tension in the wrecked ship cranked up several notches. Rodriguez's crew had gone very quiet. The Korthak salvagers were reaching for weapons. The cubs seemed to sense the danger and pressed closer to Rodriguez, making soft, distressed sounds. "Captain," Korthak said slowly, "you cannot claim these specimens without proper custody documentation. The Galactic Trade Commission requires—" "The GTC can kiss my ass." That is not a legally recognized response. Then maybe the GTC needs better lawyers. Korthak's eyes went flat and cold. Captain Rodriguez, you are interfering with a legitimate salvage operation. Stand aside, or we will file a formal complaint with the Trade Commission. File away. Rodriguez drew her plasma rifle in one smooth motion, keeping it pointed casually at the deck between them. But you're not taking the kids. This is highly irregular. This is Tuesday. That's when her comm officer's voice cut through the standoff. Captain, we've got a problem. Galactic Trade Commission enforcement vessel just dropped out of hyperspace. They're hailing us. Rodriguez kept her eyes on Korthak. What do they want? They want to know why we're threatening licensed salvage operators with unlawful interference. Because the licensed salvage operators are trying to steal children? That's not how they're phrasing it, ma'am. The GTC enforcement ship Regulatory Compliance was a blocky, ugly vessel that looked like it had been designed by committee and built by the lowest bidder. It bristled with bureaucracy and barely contained paperwork. The face that appeared on Rodriguez's comm screen belonged to Trade Inspector Vexthul, a being whose species seemed to have evolved specifically for middle management. His expression suggested he'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. Captain Rodriguez, this is Trade Inspector Vexthul of the Galactic Trade Commission. You are currently in violation of Salvage Regulation 12-441 regarding interference with licensed operations. Inspector, I'm protecting 4 orphaned children from being sold into slavery. The legal term is biological asset redistribution, and it is perfectly legal under current salvage law. Rodriguez stared at the screen. Biological asset redistribution. Correct. You're talking about selling babies. I am talking about the legal transfer of unclaimed biological specimens found in derelict vessels to licensed salvage operators who have filed proper documentation. One of the cubs in Rodriguez's arms made a particularly pitiful whimpering sound. She found herself stroking its head automatically. Inspector, these are children. They're scared, they're hungry, and their parents are dead. How is this complicated? Do you have legal guardianship documentation for these specimens? They're not specimens. Without proper custody papers, they are legally considered salvage material. The Korthak Salvage Guild has filed appropriate claims. You must surrender the biological assets immediately. Rodriguez looked down at the 4 tiny creatures in her arms. They were looking up at her with absolute trust, as if they somehow knew she was the only thing standing between them and whatever hell the salvagers had planned. No, she said. Captain Rodriguez, this is not a negotiation. Surrender the biological assets or face charges of salvage interference, illegal custody of undocumented biologicals, and obstruction of lawful commerce. Inspector, with all due respect, take your charges and shove them up your regulatory compliance. The silence that followed was pregnant with interstellar incident. Captain, Vexthul said finally, you are making a very serious mistake. Yeah, well, Rodriguez said, checking her rifle's charge level. Won't be the first time. What followed was the most surreal legal debate in galactic history, conducted while holding 4 crying alien babies and several loaded weapons. According to Galactic Trade Code Section 93, the first Korthak lawyer said, consulting his datapad while carefully not looking at Rodriguez's rifle, any biological material found aboard derelict vessels becomes property of the first party to file appropriate salvage documentation. Counter-argument, Rodriguez said, bouncing one of the cubs gently as it whimpered. They're not biological material. They're kids. The legal distinction is irrelevant, said the second Korthak lawyer, a smaller creature who seemed to believe that speaking very fast made his arguments more compelling. Unclaimed specimens default to salvage law regardless of sentience level or emotional appeals. Emotional appeals? Rodriguez's voice went dangerously quiet. You think protecting children is an emotional appeal? The third lawyer, because apparently the Korthak believed in overwhelming legal force, cleared his throat with a sound like grinding metal. Captain Rodriguez, your maternal instincts, while admirable from a biological standpoint, do not supersede established commercial law. One of the cubs looked up at Rodriguez and made a soft cooing sound that somehow conveyed absolute trust in her ability to keep them safe. Maternal instincts, she repeated. Indeed. However, without proper custody documentation. Rodriguez shifted her rifle's aim to point directly at the lawyer's thorax. Let me explain something about maternal instincts, counselor. They come with very little regard for paperwork. Captain, Trade Inspector Vexthol's voice crackled through the comm. Threatening licensed legal representatives is a violation of Commercial Code 66. So is trying to sell children, but apparently that's just Tuesday in your corner of the galaxy. The Korthak have filed all appropriate documentation. Their claim is legally sound. Their claim is morally bankrupt. Morality is not a recognized offense under salvage law. Rodriguez stared at the comm screen. Did you just say that morality isn't a recognized offense? Correct. Salvage law is based on precedent and proper documentation, not ethical considerations. Well, that explains a lot about the galaxy's problems. That's when Korthak made his first tactical error. He stepped closer to Rodriguez, mandibles clicking aggressively. Captain, you will surrender the specimens now, or we will take them by force. Rodriguez looked down at the 4 tiny creatures in her arms, then back at Korthak. Force, huh? The Salvage Guild does not make idle threats. Neither do I. She opened fire. The plasma bolt took Korthak in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into a bulkhead. The other Korthak scrambled for cover, their legal papers scattering across the debris-strewn deck. Captain Rodriguez! Inspector Vexthol's voice rose several octaves. You have just committed assault against licensed salvage operators. I committed child protection, Rodriguez called back, keeping her rifle trained on the remaining Korthak while the cubs pressed against her chest. Totally different thing. It is not legally different. Then maybe your laws need work. The second Korthak salvager was reaching for his sidearm when Rodriguez's engineer put a plasma bolt through the wall next to his head. I wouldn't, the engineer said conversationally. The captain gets cranky when people threaten kids. This is highly irregular, protested one of the lawyers. This is highly justified, Rodriguez corrected. You cannot simply shoot salvage operators for exercising legal rights. Watch me. The firefight that followed was brief, vicious, and completely one-sided. The Korthak were equipped for paperwork, not plasma fire. Rodriguez's crew was equipped for life in the outer systems, where survival often came down to who could draw faster. Cease fire! Cease fire! Inspector Vexthol was shouting over the comm. Captain Rodriguez, you are in violation of approximately 47 different commercial regulations. Send me the bill, Rodriguez said, checking the charge on her rifle while the surviving Korthak cowered behind overturned equipment. This incident will be reported to the Galactic Trade Commission, the Salvage Operators Union, and the Commercial Law Enforcement Division. Great. Maybe one of them can explain why selling children is legal in this screwed-up galaxy. That's when her tactical officer's voice cut through the chaos. Captain, we've got multiple contacts incoming. Big ones. Rodriguez's heart sank. How big? Trade Commission Enforcement Fleet. 12 vessels. Battle configuration. Through the wreckage of the Astral Dawn, Rodriguez could see the fleet dropping out of hyperspace. Massive, blocky enforcement vessels that looked like flying courthouses with weapon arrays. Attention all vessels, came the broadcast from the lead ship. This is Fleet Admiral Kexthera of the Trade Commission Enforcement Division. All parties will stand down immediately and prepare for boarding. Captain, her communications officer said quietly, they're not here to negotiate. Rodriguez looked down at the cubs in her arms. They seemed to sense the danger, pressing closer to her warmth and making soft, frightened sounds. Ma'am, her first officer said carefully, we're outnumbered 12-1. Maybe we should consider. Consider what? Handing over 4 babies to slavers because they have the right paperwork? Consider that we can't protect them if we're all dead. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, listening to the cubs' soft breathing, feeling their tiny hearts beating against her chest. You know what? She said finally. I've been thinking about this all wrong. How so, Captain? I've been treating this like a legal problem. Rodriguez checked her rifle's ammunition counter and smiled grimly. But it's not a legal problem. It's a logistics problem. Ma'am? The question isn't whether I have the legal right to protect these kids. She started moving toward her ship's armory, the cubs still cradled against her chest. The question is whether I have enough ammunition to protect them until help arrives. Help, Captain? Remember when the human colonial authority said they'd back us up if we ever needed it? Her first officer's eyes widened. Captain, you're not thinking of... I'm thinking of making the biggest diplomatic incident since the Altair trade wars. Ma'am, that could start a war. Rodriguez looked down at the 4 tiny aliens who were counting on her to keep them safe. They looked back up at her with complete trust, as if they somehow knew she would never let anyone hurt them. Then we'd better make sure it's the right kind of war. Rodriguez had forgotten about the news crews. It wasn't until her communications officer mentioned that 17 different media outlets were broadcasting live coverage of the salvage rights incident that she realized the entire galaxy was watching. Ma'am, the officer said, looking slightly pale. Galactic News Network is calling it Human Captain Defies Trade Law to Protect Alien Children. The footage of you shooting at the Korthak while holding the cubs has gone viral across 43 systems. Great, Rodriguez muttered, adjusting her grip on the cubs while keeping her rifle ready. Just what we needed. An audience. On her tactical display, she could see the Trade Commission enforcement fleet moving into position. 12 massive ships, enough firepower to reduce her single vessel to space dust in minutes. But something else was happening on her long-range scanners. Captain, we're getting new contacts. A lot of new contacts. The reinforcements? Not exactly, ma'am. Civilian vessels, dozens of them. All broadcasting support messages. Rodriguez frowned. Support messages? Her communications officer patched through a random sampling. Cargo freighter Lucky Strike standing by to assist. This is the passenger liner Stellar Dream. We're with you, Captain. Independent trader Swift Profit offering escort services. No charge. What the hell? Rodriguez said. Ma'am, it gets weirder. The Altarian Council just issued a statement condemning the Trade Commission's actions. The Centauri Federation is calling for an emergency session of the Galactic Senate. And the Vegan Pacifist Alliance just declared the Korthak Salvage Guild enemies of universal compassion. One of the cubs in Rodriguez's arms made a soft trilling sound and nuzzled against her neck. She found herself smiling despite the impossible situation. The media coverage is having some interesting effects, her intelligence officer reported. Korthak Salvage Guild stock has dropped 40% in the last hour. Meanwhile, Human Colonial Authority recruitment offices are reporting a 300% increase in applications. People want to join up because I shot some slavers? People want to join up because you shot slavers while protecting children. There's a difference. Fleet Admiral Kexthara's voice crackled over the comm, official and cold. Captain Rodriguez, you have 30 seconds to surrender the biological assets or face the full force of Trade Commission law. Rodriguez keyed her comm to broadcast on all frequencies. Civilian, military, and media. Admiral Kexthara, this is Captain Rodriguez. I've got 4 scared kids in my arms and a rifle in my hands. If you want to take them, you're going to have to explain to the galaxy why the Trade Commission thinks selling children is more important than protecting them. The silence that followed was deafening. Then her communications officer started laughing. Ma'am, you need to see this. The main display showed a split-screen news broadcast. On one side, Rodriguez, holding 4 alien babies while facing down an enforcement fleet. On the other side, Korthak the Acquisitor, being interviewed about salvage rights while sporting a bandaged shoulder. The specimens are valuable biological assets, Korthak was saying, his mandibles clicking rapidly. The human's emotional response is irrelevant to established commercial law. Mr. Korthak, the interviewer pressed, these specimens are children. How do you justify claiming ownership of orphaned alien babies? Legal precedent clearly states, legal precedent or not, the public seems to disagree with you. Korthak Salvage Guild stock has now dropped 60% since this story broke. Rodriguez watched Korthak's expression change from confident to concerned, to outright panicked. The market fluctuations are temporary, he insisted. Once the Trade Commission enforces proper salvage law. Actually, the interviewer interrupted. We're getting reports that several major corporations are severing contracts with the Salvage Guild. Apparently, being associated with child trafficking is bad for business, regardless of the legal technicalities. It's not child trafficking. It's asset redistribution. The interviewer stared at him. Mr. Korthak, do you hear yourself right now? Rodriguez found herself grinning. I think we're winning. Ma'am? Her first officer asked. The court of public opinion. Look at this. She gestured at the tactical display, which now showed over 100 civilian vessels converging on their position. Half the galaxy just decided that protecting kids is more important than following stupid laws. Captain Rodriguez. Admiral Kexathera's voice cut through the chatter, and she sounded considerably less confident than before. The Trade Commission is prepared to negotiate. Negotiate what exactly? Perhaps alternative custody arrangements for the children. Rodriguez smiled. Did you just call them children instead of biological assets, Admiral? A pause. The Commission is willing to consider various options for resolving this situation. Here's my counteroffer, Rodriguez said, looking down at the 4 cubs who were watching the proceedings with intelligent eyes. The kids stay with me until we can find their surviving relatives or appropriate guardians. The Korthak can take their salvage claims and stuff them in an airlock, and the Trade Commission can explain to the galaxy why they thought selling children was legal in the first place. Captain, you don't have the authority to dictate terms to the Trade Commission. Maybe not, but apparently I've got something better. Which is? Rodriguez gestured at her tactical display, now showing nearly 200 ships of various sizes and configurations, all broadcasting support messages. Public support. Turns out people get pretty upset when you try to steal babies, regardless of what the paperwork says. Her intelligence officer looked up from his console, grinning. Ma'am, this is getting better. The Galactic Senate just called an emergency session to review salvage law regarding sentient beings. The motion is being called the Rodriguez Amendment. The what now? Apparently, your refusal to hand over the cubs has sparked a galaxy-wide debate about whether current law adequately protects children found in salvage situations. Rodriguez blinked. I accidentally started a legal revolution? Ma'am, Senator Williams from the Human Colonial Authority is arguing that any attempt to claim sentient beings as salvage should be considered kidnapping, regardless of documentation. Senator Vexthul from Altair is backing him up. The Centauri delegation is calling for a complete overhaul of commercial law regarding biological entities. Wait, Rodriguez said slowly. You're telling me that shooting some slavers might actually change galactic law? Ma'am, you didn't just shoot slavers. You shot slavers while the entire galaxy was watching, and while protecting 4 alien children who couldn't protect themselves. There's a difference. Admiral Kexathera's voice returned, noticeably more diplomatic than before. Captain Rodriguez, the Trade Commission would like to propose a temporary ceasefire while the Senate reviews current salvage regulations. A ceasefire? Rodriguez looked down at the cubs, who seemed to be listening to the conversation with remarkable attention for creatures supposedly unable to understand galactic politics. Admiral, this was never a war. This was me protecting kids from people who wanted to hurt them. Nevertheless, the Commission is prepared to suspend enforcement actions pending legislative review. And the kids? The children will remain in your custody until appropriate guardians can be located or legal custody determined through proper channels. Rodriguez felt something she hadn't felt in hours: hope. Admiral, are you telling me that the mighty Trade Commission is backing down because people got upset about your child trafficking laws? The pause was telling. The Commission is responding to public concerns about current regulatory frameworks. Public concerns, Rodriguez repeated, grinning. Captain, the entire galaxy is watching this situation. The Commission must consider the broader implications of its actions. Rodriguez looked at the cubs in her arms, then at her crew, then at the tactical display showing hundreds of ships that had come to support a single human captain's refusal to hand over 4 orphaned children. You know what, Admiral? I think we're about to find out what happens when the right thing to do meets the law. And I'm betting the law loses. 6 months after Captain Rodriguez shot her first slaver while holding 4 alien cubs, she was standing in the Galactic Senate chambers, watching her name get attached to what the media was calling the most significant legal revolution in galactic history. "The chair recognizes Senator Williams of the Human Colonial Authority," announced the Senate President, a dignified Altarian whose species had evolved specifically for parliamentary procedure. Senator Williams rose from his seat. "Honorable colleagues, we are here today because a human ship captain reminded us that some things are more important than paperwork." The cubs, now significantly larger, sat in the gallery watching with intelligent attention. They understood more than anyone had initially realized. "The Rodriguez Amendment," Williams continued, "proposes a fundamental restructuring of how we define salvage rights when sentient beings are involved. Specifically, it states that no living, sapient creature can be claimed as salvage material, regardless of circumstances or documentation." A murmur ran through the chamber. Several trade representatives looked distinctly uncomfortable. Senator Grixthala of the Korthak delegation stood to object. "Honorable President, the economic implications of such legislation could be catastrophic. Salvage operations across the galaxy depend on established precedent. Established precedent that allows children to be sold to the highest bidder," Williams interrupted, his voice carrying across the chamber with steel undertones. "Senator Grixthala, with respect, your economic implications include the legal trafficking of orphaned alien children." "That is an inflammatory characterization." "That is exactly what it was," came Rodriguez's voice from the gallery. The cubs shifted closer to her, making soft, supportive sounds. "Captain Rodriguez," the Senate President said carefully, "this is highly irregular. So is trying to sell kids, but apparently we needed a law to figure that out." She settled back while the cubs arranged themselves around her. "Just so we're clear, if anyone else tries to claim these kids as salvage, I'm going to keep shooting slavers until the problem goes away." Silence followed. Senator Williams cleared his throat and continued as if nothing had happened. "The amendment further proposes that any attempt to claim living beings as salvage will be met with what we're calling immediate defensive intervention by human colonial authority forces." "That sounds like a threat," Senator Grixthala protested. "That sounds like a promise," Rodriguez called from the gallery. "Captain Rodriguez," the president said sharply. "What?" "He's right. It is a threat. A very specific threat. Touch a kid anywhere in the galaxy, and humans will show up with plasma rifles and attitude problems." Trade Representative Vexkala rose. "Honorable colleagues, while we appreciate Captain Rodriguez's passionate advocacy, this amendment would essentially make humanity the unofficial police force for child welfare across the galaxy." "And?" Rodriguez said. "Captain, please. Seriously. And? You're saying that like it's a problem. What exactly is the downside to stopping people from hurting children?" Senator Williams smiled. "Representative Vexkala, are you arguing that protecting children is problematic?" "I'm arguing that unilateral enforcement could destabilize commercial law. Commercial law that allows child trafficking needs to be destabilized." The president had given up trying to maintain order. "Does anyone else wish to address the captain's observations?" Senator Thaisara of the Centauri Federation stood. "Actually, yes. The Centauri delegation wishes to formally support what's being called the Rodriguez Doctrine." "The what now?" Rodriguez asked. "The principle that protection of children supersedes commercial law, backed by the implicit threat of human military intervention." Rodriguez blinked. "I've got a doctrine." "Captain," Williams said, grinning, "you've got more than that. 3 separate species have formally requested that the Human Colonial Authority establish child protection offices in their sectors. Apparently, the galaxy has decided that humans are uniquely suited for telling slavers where to stick their legal documentation. But I just wanted to protect these 4, Rodriguez said, looking down at the not-quite cubs, who were now roughly the size of large dogs and considerably more dangerous looking than before. The largest of them, she'd started calling him Marcus after her old sergeant, looked up at her and made a sound that roughly translated to affectionate exasperation. "Captain," Senator Williams said, "you've accidentally made humanity the unofficial guardians of orphaned alien children across the galaxy. The legal framework we're proposing would simply make it official." "Legal framework?" The Rodriguez Amendment establishes several key principles, Williams explained. First, no sentient being can be claimed as salvage. Second, any organization attempting to do so forfeits all legal protections and can be engaged with lethal force. Third, the Human Colonial Authority is authorized to establish child protection services wherever requested by local governments. Rodriguez stared at him. You're militarizing child protective services. We're ensuring that what happened to Marcus and his siblings never happens to anyone else. At the mention of his name, Marcus made a trilling sound that somehow conveyed both appreciation and mild threat. His siblings joined in, creating a harmonious chord that made several senators shift uncomfortably in their seats. They're getting bigger, Senator Grixithala observed nervously. And smarter, Rodriguez said proudly. Marcus figured out how to hack the ship's environmental controls last week. Little Sarah can calculate hyperspace jumps in her head. And Tommy. She looked down at the smallest cub who was eyeing the Korthak delegation with unmistakable predatory interest. Tommy's been asking about weapons training. Weapons training? The president asked faintly. Well, yeah. They're Zephyrian combat breeds, remember? They were bred to be the galaxy's most dangerous soldiers. The fact that they're currently cuddling my boots doesn't change their genetics. The entire chamber went very quiet as the implications sank in. Captain, Senator Williams said carefully, are you saying that the 4 children you protected are going to grow up to be living weapons? I'm saying they're going to grow up to be whatever they choose to be, Rodriguez replied firmly. But if someone threatens them or other kids like them, they're going to have options other than hiding and crying. Tommy looked up at her and made a sound that definitely expressed approval of this plan. This changes things, Representative Vexkala said slowly. If these children grow up with human values but Zephyrian combat capabilities, they'll be really good at protecting other kids, Rodriguez finished. Is that supposed to be a problem? It could fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy. Rodriguez considered this. Good. The current balance allows child trafficking. I'm in favor of altering it. Senator Williams nodded. Which brings us to the final component of the Rodriguez Amendment. The establishment of joint human Zephyrian child protection units, trained in both human ethics and Zephyrian combat techniques. Joint units? Rodriguez asked. Think about it, Captain. Marcus and his siblings aren't the only Zephyrian children who've been orphaned or threatened, but if they grow up with human protection philosophies and Zephyrian abilities, they become the ultimate child protective services agents, Rodriguez realized. Exactly. Who's going to argue with a Zephyrian combat breed who's been raised to believe that protecting children is the highest possible calling? Marcus made a sound that roughly translated to, bring it on. The vote on the Rodriguez Amendment will be held tomorrow, the president announced. All delegations are encouraged to consider not just the legal implications, but the moral imperatives involved. As the session adjourned, Rodriguez found herself surrounded by reporters, diplomats, and curious aliens of every description. Captain Rodriguez, called a reporter from Galactic News Network. How do you feel about accidentally becoming the most influential human in galactic politics? I feel like I need a bigger ship, Rodriguez said, looking down at Marcus and his siblings, who were rapidly outgrowing their current accommodations. And more ammunition. Are you concerned about the militarization of child protection services? I'm concerned about the people who think militarizing child protection is a bad idea. What exactly are they planning to do to kids that they're worried about armed opposition? What's your response to critics who say the Rodriguez Doctrine could lead to human imperialism? Rodriguez considered this. If protecting children from slavers is imperialism, then I guess I'm an imperialist. Captain, called a diplomatic correspondent, 17 different species have requested human child protection services. How do you respond? Rodriguez looked down at Marcus, who had grown enough to rest his head against her hip. I respond by saying that any species that needs human protection for their children probably shouldn't have been letting people hurt their children in the first place, but will take the job. And if other species object to human intervention? Rodriguez's smile was not particularly reassuring. Then they can discuss it with Marcus and his siblings when they're fully grown. I have a feeling that conversation's going to be very educational. The next day, the Rodriguez Amendment passed by a margin that surprised everyone except Rodriguez. Of course it passed, she said. Nobody wanted to be on record as opposing child protection while Marcus was staring at them. The final vote was 847 for, 23 against, with 12 abstentions. The opposing votes came from commercial interests. The abstentions came from species still calculating the long-term implications of militarized child welfare. "Ma'am," her communications officer reported, "we're getting priority messages from, well, everywhere. 43 different governments are requesting immediate child protection services. 17 species are asking about joint training programs. And the Korthak Salvage Guild has officially declared bankruptcy." Bankruptcy? Turns out nobody wants to do business with child traffickers once the galaxy starts paying attention. Who knew? Rodriguez grinned. Sometimes the market actually works. There's more, Captain. The Human Colonial Authority is formally requesting that you head up the new Galactic Child Protection Service. Rodriguez looked down at Marcus and his siblings, who were watching the proceedings with the same intelligent attention they'd shown from the beginning. "What do you think?" she asked them. "Want to make this official?" Marcus looked up at her, then at his siblings, then back at Rodriguez. He made a complex sound that somehow conveyed determination, affection, and a certain anticipatory enthusiasm for future slaver-shooting opportunities. "I think that's a yes," Rodriguez said. 6 months later, Captain Rodriguez, now Director Rodriguez, stood on the bridge of the HCA Protector, watching her tactical display track 47 different child protection operations across the galaxy. Marcus and his siblings, now the size of small horses and considerably more dangerous, served as both her advisors and her not-so-secret weapons. They had indeed proven to be excellent at protecting children, combining Zephyrian combat capabilities with an almost obsessive dedication to child welfare that they'd learned from their adoptive human mother. "Director," her communications officer reported, "we're getting a distress call from the Rigel sector. Someone's trying to claim a group of orphaned Altarian children as biological salvage." Rodriguez checked her rifle and smiled. Marcus and his siblings were already moving toward the shuttle bay, their expressions suggesting that someone was about to receive a very educational experience about the new realities of galactic child protection. "Set course for Rigel," Rodriguez ordered. "Let's go teach some people about the Rodriguez Doctrine." As the Protector jumped to hyperspace, Rodriguez reflected on how her simple refusal to hand over 4 scared alien babies had somehow revolutionized galactic law, militarized child protection services, and made humanity the unofficial guardians of orphaned children across the galaxy. She decided she was okay with that. After all, someone had to do it.